morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are located. I'm Joyce Garippa, Director of Content at Reagan Communications. Thrilled to be here today for 10 stories PR pros just like you need to share with your audiences in partnership with AccessWire. Before we get started with our program today, just want to give you some housekeeping notes. Please use the Q&A function to ask our speakers any questions. This will be a highly interactive session, so please do use the chat and the Q&A for comments and questions. I will be in the background on the lookout. Within 24 to 48 hours, you will receive a survey. Once you have completed that survey, you will have access to all the slides and bonus materials from today's session within 3 to 5 business days. So please do be on the lookout for that survey. Now, on with today's session. I'd like to welcome AccessWire's CEO, Brian Balbirnie, and Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing, Jennifer Hammers, who will review today's best PR practices that will help you deliver the stories you need to share with shareholders, stakeholders, and the public. You'll also get tips on how to pitch and get your stories noticed by relevant media contacts. The duo will detail 10 stories, 10, that are so important in today's business world and need media attention. So Jennifer and Brian, the virtual stage is yours.
Hey everyone, great to meet you. It's always so hard to talk to everyone, and I wish I could see all of your faces and interact, but we are excited and appreciate you all joining on today. I also want to go ahead and introduce Karen Reynolds, who is our Director of Agency Relations, who is joining us on this topic today as well. Hey, Karen. So again, really excited for all of you to join us today. We're excited to share these stories, working with agencies, public companies, private companies, looking at trends today of what we're seeing out there, what we're hearing, and what we know the media is looking for, and what we really feel is necessary to share and get your story out there. So if you want to go ahead and we can move on to the next slide, introductions, there we are again. We can go one further. So I wanted to start and kick today off with the power of storytelling. And we have been very fortunate to have this wonderful relationship with Reagan PR Daily. And for those of you, I'm not sure if you attended a conference that we were at in New York a few weeks ago, that media relations and measurement. So if you were there, I apologize that I'm going to tell this story once again, but I think it's such a powerful story. And for those of you that weren't able to attend it, I think it's really interesting because you could have the greatest communication strategy on the planet, but at the core of everything we do is really the idea of storytelling. And when we talk about the importance of getting certain stories, certain news out to the media, right? You can have the greatest news in the world, but if you don't tell it the right way, it's not going to make the impact that you want. And a great story to just share the impact of what storytelling really has on people is this significant object project. And in this project, there were a couple of journalists that went out and they bought these little tchotchkes. We'll call them tchotchkes, little trinkets. They went to a flea market. They bought the average was about $1 that they spent on these items. And then they were tasked and they thought, let's try this experiment out and let's write a story about each one of these trinkets. And I'm talking, there was like a little ceramic pig. I mean, a little plate that was old and rusty. And they wrote these stories and they put them on eBay. And maybe I can do this in the chat for half a second, but so again, the average they spent on these tchotchkes was about $1.50. What do you think the total, and I think maybe it was about 20 objects, we'll call it roughly, when they wrote these stories and put them on eBay, what are some guesses on the average that they got for the total of these items? Anyone throw some numbers out there. I don't know if I can see them in the chat. I think I can. Okay, $1,000, $450,000, 500, 300. I love it. This is great. You guys are going to be shocked by this. 2,500. Oh, we're getting closer. We're getting closer. So if you can believe it, they brought in, there you go, getting even closer, 3,000. They brought back $3,600 from this overall investment of roughly $15 by adding a story and giving value to these items. So really showing the value of this, of telling the story around something and impact that it can have. So let's go to the next slide. Everyone, by the way, you should look that up. It's such a unique and such a great story. I love it. I think you'll all get a kick out of it. And it's kind of good to share with everyone as you're writing these stories and sharing with the media to say, hey, here's really the value of what storytelling does. So now as we look as an overall communication strategy, and of course we're coming from the angle because we are a newswire, really looking at the purpose of the press release. And there are a couple real true purposes here that are very obvious that stand out. Very particular in today, and something we also talked about at this most recent conference was the press release really being a source of truth. And, we look at that in comparison to, we thought years and years ago that social media was going to become the new press release. It's where you put everything out, and that's going to be the standard. And that didn't happen. In fact, there are so many studies showing that people actually do not, at this point, want to get their news from social media because they don't trust it. So they are really turning to the press release to get that source of truth from companies. It helps build brands. Again, even though we've had lots of distrust, we'll say, with the media in recent years, they still are looking to the press release as this, it's an exception, right? They're looking at it as that credible source. And I love that 72% of PR professionals rank storytelling, back to storytelling, as the most important kind of communication a company can provide to its audiences. And this is certainly the outlet for everyone here to do it. So we can keep moving forward. So when we look now at news values, what does the media want to hear? And I love this first one. As you're looking at your communication strategy, as you're looking at your press release, as you're looking at stories that need to get out there, my older brother is 7 years older than me, and I will never forget this. He was already in his first job out of college, and I think he hired me as an intern. And he said, hey, have you ever heard of this radio station, WIIFM? And I was like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. I know like the oldie station and 95.5. And he's like, no. Let me tell you what it really means. And what it really means is what's in it for me, right? When we're writing stories and we're writing that, we're looking at what is the impact it will have on others? What's in it for them as they are going to read this? What's in it for the media as they're looking at that story? What is that audience going to take away? And I think that's the first thing that everyone needs to take a look at as you are formulating the stories. And as we get into these topics of what needs to be shared, is as we start to formulate the headlines, as we formulate the stories, it's what is the impact it's going to have, and how do we ensure that they know that? Timeliness, there's always, timeliness to me serves two purposes. It is getting it to media journalists at the right time, right? So there are very specific times you can always, by the way, access on our website. We have a ton of blogs looking at the right time to send out to ensure that we're getting it in front of them and not angering them. They're not up against deadlines. It's not, the wrong hours at, 4 a.m. But also making sure that the news that we're sharing is really true. It's really true new news. Prominence, also think about what in your story you can do to make you stand out from the rest, right? How do we innovate? How do we make ourselves different from the sea of information that journalists are getting? Conflict, I think this is interesting. I think going back to timeliness, I think in the world of not trying to get political, but right, this past week, we've seen a lot of strong vantage points coming out over this Roe versus Wade. And it's been really interesting to me in particular to look at the number of executives, the number of stories that have come out showing strong standpoints, but they're getting attention. And it's okay, I think, for us to do that, right? I think it's important for us to do that and to get these voices out, and they should be shared. And last is human interest and philanthropy, right? And these were some of the topics you were putting in there as well. In the very beginning is how are we contributing to society? What are we doing for the community are all really important values as you're starting to formulate this communication strategy. We can move on to the next. So these are very quick. What's not newsworthy? As I mentioned before, not so new news, right? We don't want to rehash older things, bring them back. Things that are relevant to today. Daily activities. I think of Facebook when I do this, right? Because I always think of like friends that are, they post when they go to the bathroom or when they ate a sandwich. We want to put things out there that are not daily, right? That are going to stand out, that are going to innovate, that are going to catch attention. And of course, anything not written well. We have numerous examples where we've seen poor grammar, headlines that are not written well. So we need to make sure, of course, that when we send it, because the first thing that will turn anyone off is something that is not written well. On to the next. What is newsworthy? Of course, something new. Exclusive research, right? I tend to err on the side. I come from a very strong background in healthcare. So I'm always looking, there's new clinical trials that are coming out, right? When there is exclusive research that's going to garner the attention of the audience, right? They're going to see that, they're going to want to read that. Trends also, I think, as we look at what's going on in the world today, and we'll start to get into these topics, right? We're talking about trends because there are, we've really narrowed it down to these 10 things. Although it's funny because you all touched on some of these things in the chat that maybe not be in our presentation, but are still at the same token, really relevant and really important. But there are some trends. We just got back from NERI actually, and we're able to listen in on some workshops and learn some things that are really strong and important out there that we're excited to share with you today. But yeah, let's make sure that you're up to date, you are aware of the trends that are occurring today, so that you can really hook on to that and put that and incorporate that into your messaging as well. So as we look at trends and we look at these topics, I'm going to hand it over to Brian to dive into our first of them.
Thank you, Jen. A hard act to follow. I'll try my best here and talk to you folks about a couple of key areas that both we as a company are very focused on, and where our customers and partners and advocates in the industry are also focused on as well. The first is CSR, right? The corporate social responsibility, something that dates back to perhaps maybe the 50s, when I think a lot of folks referred to him as the father of modern CSR. Howard Bowen wrote his first book about CSR, something that perhaps maybe wasn't very well received. Maybe in the 70s, it started to kick up, and more recently in the last 30 years, we've seen more and more of it. So as I go through some of the things today, we'll go on to the next slide. In the chat, if you could, I'd like to hear from the audience if they can think about a large brand or company. Tell me somebody that stands out for you that has the ultimate CSR packaged up policy that you either know of by brand or maybe you work with. And we'll compare some stories here in a few minutes. There's a lot of impact to CSR. More than a third of buyers globally are prepared to pay more for sustainable products. The shirt that I'm wearing today is actually made out of recycled bottles, plastic bottles. Kind of an interesting concept. There's more and more clothing that's coming about in that world that people care passionately about and want to be involved and identify with brands that align there. CSR is generally a term more often used to describe a company's efforts to improve society, where a business is located, where they have concentrations of employees and customers to have impact to some of that. These efforts can range from just donating money to causes that are very important nonprofits, all the way up to impacts that align with one business core values, and or implementing their own environmentally friendly policies in the workplace. Something we've done here, and we encourage companies to do all the time. Obviously, the four main types: environmental, ethical, philanthropic, and economic. And so I'm going to move to now look in the chat to see if I've got any folks telling me one. Patagonia is a good one. REI is a good one as well. Ben and Jerry's, that's one of my three. Good there. Allbirds, Tom's, these are all great ones, right? They really are. They have wonderful initiatives, and it bridges the gap between CSR, ESG. They converge a little bit. So Lush is a good one too. I'll give you one, right? Ben and Jerry, somebody said it, 1988 became a certified B corporation, right? Balances both the purpose and the profit by meeting those high standards of social environmental performance, full transparency, and legal accountability. Very unique. 1988, I think Ben and Jerry's did that. Levi's, if somebody didn't know about that, right? 1991, coming off the back of outsourced, product clothing and what that meant. They released a global code of conduct, addressing sourcing, operating guidelines in the workplace, which is really pivotal for a lot of the manufacturing programs today. Didn't see any more come about, but Starbucks 2002 is the cafe framework, right? The coffee and farmers equity plan that they put in place. Those are three really good areas on the screen. There's a couple of others that both Boston Scientific and Georgia Pacific, as well as KeyBank, are doing, and their local markets as well. We'll move along as we kind of transition into thinking about ESG to the next slide. ESG is a big topic. I know all of you are consuming content daily, frameworks, policies, procedures, platforms, reporting tools. There is, to a degree, ESG overload in the market. And I think it's very important for folks to be very cautious about some of the frameworks that they adopt from others that are writing great blogs, great white papers, and publishing content. It's good to learn from, but it is very good, as we go on to the next slide, to figure out what really is very important to you as a business. Consumers, customers, they have impact to virtually move mountains now. Social media has helped this prolifically, right? Companies without a plan, small or large, could have an issue, specifically for ones that have a growing B2C brand. Is really, really important. The E&Y, facts that you see on your screen, 74% of institutional investors say they were more likely to divest from companies that have poor sustainability performance. Just think about that for a second, right? As companies start up, whether it's a product or a service, and build a business to one day find a public market, to become a public company, right? To ring the bell at the NYSE or New York Stock Exchange, and to not have a plan as you work hard to institutionalize your company, to realize that one day your shareholders, institutions, family offices, and us as retail shareholders start divesting the company because there isn't a clear ESG plan that equally aligns with both the environment that we are today or our core values. A lot of companies have been caught flat-footed here, and that's why there's a lot of content about this in the market. I think from a consumer base and an institutional or shareholder base, it is one of the most important things for a company to really have a clear plan of what their ESG message is. And a lot of folks, I will tell you this, both from talking to thousands of our customers over a period of years, everybody thinks they have to have an ESG plan today that's perfect, that aligns with the largest brands in the world. And it doesn't. It is perfectly acceptable to have a very beginning framework for what ESG represents to you as a business and how you intend to grow it, and be fully transparent to actually explain that to folks, that you intend to perform and continue to add to your ESG plan. Start small is the point, and work your way up. Therefore, VC firms are highly focused on some companies today that if they don't have an ESG plan, you don't get in the door to pitch. It just doesn't happen. And it is something, but for us, our industry, both as PR professionals, IR professionals, is very important to align and figure out what the ESG motives are, both for a shareholder, a customer, an employee, and then the community around you, back to the other side of the CSR plan. That is very important as we move along to the next slide to talk about something else I think is very, very important, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DE&I of the world that we live. I will tell you, our perspectives, we've gone through significant amounts of things here in our organization over the past 3 years as we built out our DE&I platform. If you go on to the next slide, if you could. This is a unique topic for PR professionals, right? Glassdoor gives you content that you can consume. There are CNBC sources that we pulled from today. There are literally hundreds of good sources of data that you should be using as a framework to build upon. We all should look to seek out what others are doing in their craft. The DE&I space, it's important to reach down the hall to HR executives. We as PR professionals don't know everything, right? It's our job to help craft that message, but go down the hall and build relationships with the HR teams and practices. If you don't have an HR program in place, or your organization isn't large enough to have an inside HR team, there are organizations outside. One's called SHRM. Reach out to SHRM, right? They are a fantastic organization. They have webinars, case studies, white papers they write on what DE&I means for the industry and what folks in the PR and IR space can actually do. We've done shared thought leadership with SHRM before in the past. We use content every day here in our organization, our internal platform from SHRM. It's a great resource for the PR world to grab a hold of. And and take years to help build out what that looks like. Once you have a framework that represents the fabric of the business, I think that is very important, right? The fabric of what the business really stands for. It's easy to tell the story. That's our craft, right? It's what we do, pitches, posts, blogs. If I could use an example, we have an ESG committee here that represents our entire organization as an employee base globally. They help set policy internally for the company. They recommend initiatives that are brought directly to executive management, and they're taken very seriously and they're used. They help educate very important topics for all three pillars here, both D, E, and I. It is very important to bring in your employees, develop a path for framework that they feel like they can be a part of, they can help influence, and they can help around the community to ensure it. We do very different things in a lot of organizations. We have our front entranceway of our corporate office has been dedicated to this space. So if you were here during Mother's Day and Father's Day recently, there are pictures of moms and dads with their kids really embracing that holiday and paying tribute to each one of those employees that work their butts off every day for us here. And then recently, Black History Month in February, the LGBTQ community this month, and cancer awareness coming in October. We dedicate everything that we do to each one of these causes, both internally and externally. We led a march here in our corporate offices in Raleigh through the community with the rest of the LGBTQ community to be able to show our support, right? We will do the same in cancer awareness in October. This is driven from our employee bases, and it is very important culture to be able to draft in both your constituents, whoever they may be, into those initiatives and what DE&I means to you. Thank you, Jen. I'm going to hand it back to you. There's a few more great topics that you're going to go through next.
Yeah, you're a hard act to follow as well. So, but that is it's a great lead into this because, DEI, CSR, ESG are all incredible ways to retain talent, right? And I don't know, maybe in the chat we could take a survey, but I have a feeling that I think there are 125, maybe 124 will at least say they have felt the great resignation. And all of these areas, right, by putting this information out helps to retain a lot of that talent. And so one of these other areas that is really, really important to get out today is the idea of hiring and promoting. I have the pleasure of, I commute back and forth from Nashville over to Raleigh for work. And so I sit and I wait for my flight and I get to meet tons of really interesting people. And I sat next to this poor man and tortured him a little bit one evening while I was waiting for my flight. And he's from a company called the Work Institute. And he said, I travel here as well monthly. And I look at reasons that people are, why are we experiencing this great resignation and what are people looking for today in their companies? And he said, I have all of these reports and whatnot. And by the way, he just published it. So you can go and look at it. It's amazing. And I tortured him at 7 o'clock at night and said, pull your computer out. I want to see this report and see everything. And I made him work that night, but it was really great. And this is why I find it so important. Today's world, we just live in a different world today, right? I mean, people didn't care. We're back in the day. It was always about, it's really always been about money. It's been about flexibility. It's been about so many different things where today it's about advancement. It is about knowing that when you join into a company that there is room for growth. And I think a lot of times we don't highlight that enough out to the world. And as we're trying to attract talent and also really build our internal employee loyalty, it's really important to share this information because that's what they care about today. Advancement was by far number one, what people wanted to see here. And if it's happening under the radar, people don't know that. Right? So it might be happening, but if you don't show it, it never happened, right? So really, really important to get that out there, especially when we're looking at statistics where, today the statistics show, right? It's people find it easy to go and get a job, right? 61% say it was easy and 33% say it was very easy. So retention is such, and I know I have felt this, right? Retention is so important, and attracting really great new talent is important as well. So I'm going to stop there and I think we're going to hand it over to Joyce for a minute just to maybe ask a few questions and get a little bit of interaction going here.
So it's funny, Jennifer, I just recently heard, we talked about the Great Resignation. We moved into the Great Retention. And the other day I heard, or a couple of weeks ago, I heard the Great Reprioritization.
Oh my God.
That's a tough word to say. And we
What do
might have
we
to have a
mean?
spell check on it too. We've been hearing a lot about that. We
Yeah.
do have a question in the Q&A, and it's really is around, and I was going to ask something similar around best practices for, CSR, ESG, DE&I. There are some crossover elements, obviously, CSR and ESG. So can you provide some examples of what types of stories you would recommend our audience tells?
That's a tough one. I will give an example of something we did. Maybe that would be helpful. I think this would resonate with a lot of the folks listening today. You may or may not have heard of the Pledge 1%. It's a foundation that Mark Benioff started several years back that companies can join that meet a certain criteria with the underlying pledge to give back 1% of profits, 1% of product, 1% of their time, and other qualifications as well. We created an Access to Giving Foundation about 1.5 years ago, where we give far more than 1% of our time to this. We give far greater than 1% of the profits that we generate from the conference that we do. But what we found is the event was focused around the storytelling process of a public company to the community, was really more about what are the processes for those folks, what are the well-being of their employees, what are the benefits to a customer buying a product. We were fortunate enough to have a guest speaker, John Hope Bryant, that came in, wonderful individual that did a guest speaking process and talked for about an hour, very much about community, what it means to give back. Very profound event. Most companies that presented and took part really thought it was about pitching their company and storytelling what they were doing. The feedback that we got was tremendous. It's the enlightening amount of education they got from that event. They went on for 1.5 days. Something that we're going to continue to do here for years. It brought together all three of those elements to help provide at least an example. I don't know, maybe Jen or others, if you've got something else you'd like to share.
Yeah, I to just add on to that a little bit, I think, because I think you want to ask for some differentiation too of what kinds of things you can be talking about. There was a headline that was a PSE&G award. And so I think one area that you can focus on when you're getting this information out, and it will dovetail nicely into our next topic, are awards. If your company is being recognized for the work that they are doing in a certain area, it is important to get that out there, right? This comes back to that whole brand recognition. It comes back to building your brand loyalty, building your employee loyalty. So share those awards when you've done something well. I think philanthropy, right, and community, what are you doing? I think that's another area to talk about those particular things that you've participated in, that you've been doing and taking care of for your local communities. It could be on a local level, it could be on a national level, but it's important to get that information out there. And then lastly, I would say, I think events, right? And I think this is what Brian was talking about. There are events that you're leading, right? Marches that we've hosted or things that we've participated in. And I think those are really 3 good distinct areas that are different enough, right? But you need to be sharing in each one of those to help with that brand recognition and that employee loyalty.
That's great, Jen and Brian, appreciate that. We do have another question in the Q&A, so I just want to go through this, and I will provide a little bit of an opinion here as well, because we do obviously a lot of conferences around this topic, CSR, ESG, DEI, and the question is, our company does a CSR report annually. Do you feel that ESG and DE&I should be incorporated into that report? And I can tell you from the reports I've read, they have incorporated both ESG and DE&I. And from a recent conference we had, the suggestion from one of the speakers was to not just, give the entire report to the media, right? It's carve out the pieces of the report that really will make headlines. And they also suggested, having a personal opinion. There was one example in that conference that we thought was extraordinary, and they actually had a subject matter expert internally at the company write a personal opinion piece about what they were doing around ESG. And it was highly applauded by the audience on that conference. So it's just a suggestion, but both to you, Jennifer, and to Brian, any examples of how this has been done effectively in terms of, releasing your reports and getting that media attention.
I think Coca-Cola's done a great job. And I encourage you to go look at what they've done. And they've got a whole entire platform as part of their corporate section or their investor relations section as well, that brings it all together. It ties to their annual report. It ties to all of the marketing collateral that they use, the messaging that they use. It's very consistent across all mediums. I think that brings together what should be, to the point of the question in which you said, Joyce, they all should be together in our opinion as well. There's a voice of reason, there's a voice of understanding. A subject matter expert is a great idea. Whoever said that in one of your events is a fantastic. Have an internal person in the organization, regardless of what their title is, to provide that subject matter expertise internally, both from an employee base and customer vendor base, is very important, I think, as well.
And I'll add on because I think those three, I agree 1,000%, right? I think those three, they're almost, and I don't want to say they're interchangeable, but they are so intertwined, right? In fact, I separated them out. We separated these in this presentation, but I originally had them as three together, right? Because they really do play off each other to the point where, it's interesting. I worked with Dannon years and years ago on a sustainability project. And so CSR in my mind has been a thing for a very, very long time. ESG is a newer term. I really had to look it up. I'm very honest to differentiate. And I'm what are the true distinctions between CSR and ESG? DEI has a little more clarification on what that differential is, even though it plays in. But I think even just the way as you look at it, as you're incorporating into the report, and as I was reading from a differential standpoint, is when you're looking at CSR, you're looking at your plan. Right? What is your actual framework for what the company is planning to do from a strategic standpoint, right? How are we going to create the sustainability? What are the pieces of the puzzle that we're putting into place that are going to propel us as an organization forward? Where when you're looking at ESG and you can kind of dovetail it to say, hey, here's our plan, but here's ESG is what's measurable, right? It's here are the things that we've done that have actually made the impact, right? What have we done that has impacted the environment? What are the statistics? What are these little bits and pieces? So I think just looking from a more structure standpoint, if you're looking for that as well, that's a really nice segue into the CSR to the ESG, and then incorporating DEI as a part of it as well.
Awesome. Are you going to take it from here again, Jen and Brian? I'll come back again soon.
Yeah. Let's get rolling. I think we're off to, I think Karen's up now.
Yes.
Thank you. And one thing I wanted to share when Brian was speaking to the events that Issuer Direct and Access Wire hosted for Pride Month, I'm a work from home in another location. So it was very important that the team also shared all of those events on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, because that made me feel like I was part of it. And I was able to really enjoy and take pride in what was happening in the home office from afar, and able to share that with my colleagues as well. So just a small tidbit there that I was a big fan of. But now we're going to talk about the things that you have to celebrate. And so one of the great things about storytelling as it relates to awards and accolades is, of course, there's nothing more powerful than a third-party endorsement. And as a quick story, before we jump into all of the different ways that you can celebrate awards and accolades, back in the very late 90s, I was a cub reporter for a newspaper up in middle of Maine. And the town I represented had won most livable city. And I thought, it's small city. And I thought to myself, as a young writer up in the middle of nowhere, it felt as unlivable as humanly possible. How could this be? And to the rest of the grizzled veteran reporters in the room, they just saw it as a Chamber of Commerce press release. It was pretty ho-hum to them, but there was no context. What in the world made this city livable? Because it wasn't livable to me. Well, they decided to have me really lean in. And the long and short of it, I ended up with an incredible story about all of the social services that this town offered to the underserved, and all of the amazing nonprofits that were supporting the different pieces of the puzzle for people that really needed support. I had no idea. And the long and short of it, without the context, we simply did not understand how valuable that is. So yes, why are awards and accolades so important? Of course, they help to elevate your business. They help to enhance your partnership with your stakeholders, whether that's employees, customers, etc. And there's nothing more powerful than a third-party endorsement to build credibility. But there's so much more to it. And as we advance to the next slide, we'll talk about some of the different types of awards that you announce and how to make sure that the story includes those key pieces of context. And so in your universe, of course, even within our own partners with PR Daily, we know there are a lot of award programs and a lot of opportunities for folks to enter and be named to lists. And certainly we know the value of that as it relates to developing new business, building brand loyalty, etc. But there are so many other types of awards out there. Let's talk about a couple of them. So one can be the best places to work. And so similar to what Jen and Brian were referring to earlier, this is really a great way to enter your company or your client's company to be able to say, we're not perfect, we're working on our CSR plan, we're working on our ESG plan, but where are we in comparison to our peer group in the community or in the industry? And so having those awards, if it's a best places to work, or if it's something related to those topics, really allows you to benchmark where you are now versus where you hope to be. And what that can do is, of course, drive your employees to recognize that you are a leader in the space, you are doing the steps and taking the steps necessary. So that's great on an employee side. Naturally, you can flip it around. The remainder of your stakeholders, again, whether that's customers, whether that's potential customers, they want to see that you're making that progress as well. So within the context of best places to work and things like that, those are some natural awards that can lead to social media campaigns, press releases, etc. But remember, when you have that context, you're in the top 50, how many entered? Was it 51 or was it 250? I was reading through a bunch of articles earlier today and got a really good sense of which ones really stood out. If you give more, the more context you give, the more value those awards tend to have. Another type of award that's a little bit more on the industry side might be where you place in the context of a Gartner or a Forrester with regard to product development. Completely different from a best places to work. This is really showing your progress on the product development side. And again, similar to the press releases and campaigns that I was researching regarding those types of announcements, it really comes down to context again. It might seem that it's not quite so important to be in the bottom left corner where you're the niche or the up and coming player, but for your business, that could be enormously valuable. And so where do you fit in and how do you position that out to your potential customers so that they understand where you are in the food chain? One of the other things that I think announcing awards and accolades can do is help with both validating your current customers to make them feel really good about the decision they made to work with you, and also build some FOMO. We know that there's nothing more valuable than the potential customers in your landscape wondering what they're missing out on when you keep winning awards. What is it about this product that it's continuing to get talked about when nobody else seems to be getting quite as much attention? So as we advance to the next slide, these are some of the things when you're thinking about these awards, rather than thinking of it as kind of a ho-hum, we did this, let's just get the news out. How do you make it a little more exciting? And so I hope right now some of these ideas have already resonated, but here's a few other things. One of the really valuable things that I've seen with folks in the public relations space when they win awards, whether again it's at the PR Daily level or maybe it's a local event, is sharing it beyond just the immediate colleagues. Are you sharing it on LinkedIn? Are you tweeting it? Maybe your family members and your colleagues from other companies or your clients would be happy to share it as well. I have seen this in my own universe. I am an avid LinkedIn user. And sometimes I see 3,000 or 4,000 views when I congratulate somebody on winning an award. So I know how valuable that can be. And if you're not sure, ask somebody to do it for you. You'd be surprised how happy they'd be to help spread the word. Another thing that can be really helpful is when you are applying for awards, try to get your customers more involved. Maybe they're providing the testimonial, or maybe again, if they share it, they can then have a discount code for the next time they use you or something like that. Customers take a big interest in helping to promote you. They want you to succeed. And then finally, this might seem a little counterintuitive, but be gracious. Don't forget to congratulate the other winners. Even if they're in your competitive space, it gets you visibility on the social channels where you'll be seen by their customers and vice versa. But more than that, I think it's important that we celebrate all of the wonderful accomplishments in our peer group and not just be solely focused on ourselves. And what better way to share all of that information? Don't be afraid to incorporate it into your marketing materials, whether that's badges that you've earned or other logos that you can incorporate. For me, I am a past president of the PR Club of New England, and I couldn't be more proud of it. I earned it. I worked very hard to do it. And I consider that one of my highest achievements. And it has nothing to do with my day-to-day world, but I am so proud of it. And I am always honored to include them when I talk about my personal awards and accolades. So as we advance to the next page, I hope this was helpful just to get your thought going around how to make awards a little more exciting and a little more contextual for your stakeholders.
Thank you, Karen. That was super insightful and really, really wonderful. Moving on to product launches. This is where we go from super high energy. We can go back one. There we go. Karen's got all these wonderful positive awards to say, and I hold dear product launches because I launched a product many moons ago that failed. So failure's okay if we learn from it, right? So that happens to be one of the things that draws me so much to the PR world. Is that it is so incredibly important for a product launch to get a press release out there. It's, you know what, and it is to get a press release out there, but it's to have a really strong communication strategy. And it's not about just a launch that day. It is about setting the stage, building excitement for this product to get launched. So a couple things to note, right? As I said, don't wait till the day your product launches, really tease that up. And that's through various channels, right? That's through multimedia. I love multimedia, using that on social, using that on your website, and building up to your press release. Even press release announce that it's coming. There are certain days to send it. Again, looking at sending a product press release on a Thursday, open rate jumps to over 26%. Worst day, April 1st. Probably don't put a product launch out on April Fool's Day. That would be a bad idea. Intuitive, yet sometimes we just don't think about that. Fridays before a holiday. Again, there are certain times you can go, we've got plenty of resources to look at. This probably goes for more than just a product press release, but to me, this is one of the most valuable press releases and communications that needs to get out there. Also, make sure, particularly in your headlines, that you're really packing a punch here, and making, you want to get people to open this, to read your story, make sure it's something different and it's grabbing attention. Keep your announcement to a single page, right? Don't go too long. Make sure what you put in there is really relevant, short, sweet, and going to garner attention. And I love on the next slide, my favorite thing here is that to me, this is one of the greatest examples of a press release. I love that they use everything and they use it so well, right? We talked about a really short, punchy headline, right? I use the word launch, use it. You're launching a new product, get that out there. That's going to garner engagement right off the bat. Include stats. We talked about exclusive research, right? That's what they did here. They put in exclusive research and showed actual outcomes from this product. they included a video, a little tutorial on what this product looks like. So you can actually really get a feel for it. And then graphics, right? They included, and there were more in this, but there are so many, again, statistics, and I'm such a numbers person, right? Because it really is a source of truth here, but there are numbers that show that engagement goes up tremendously when you're including multimedia and including graphics and including statistics. So to me, this really speaks to when you're looking at product launches, again, have a really strong strategy. Don't wait till the day of, make sure it's planned out. You've got time to do it. And when you do it, and when you're ready to, include all of these, include the research, include the images to really get that engagement. I see that someone put a question in the chat here. Recommend these same product launch best for announcing an event. You know what I would say, and Brian and Karen, please chime in. I would absolutely say, yes, for an event, you want to give time, right? You want to garner excitement as you're building up to an event. You want to give people time. You want to look at where the event's being held, right? And we get into some things about locations and whatnot, but certainly looking at local strategy, right, versus national strategy. What kind of event? Really looking at your target audience there, using, again, images, getting people excited about it. I think you can take all of this absolutely and really apply it to an event. I don't know, Karen or Brian, if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would add a little bit. I think it depends on the product or what's being announced, the impact. I think about a tangible product that maybe a company has an annual conference for, that is launching or set to launch typically every season new products. You likely want to try to tie those together from an event, use the media to be able to draw out some of those products, to be able to get additional coverage on those products, to help build momentum for what the actual event would be, so that there is more prolonged impact rather than one announcement that talks about both the event and the product launch. Try to gain some media attention in that reality to extend some of that messaging, to build some momentum for registration for folks for the event.
I'm going to add one more thing to that, because it's such a valid point. And, I forget, I come from the events industry for 20 years, so I should have probably thought of this when you asked that question, but there's a very big fail that comes along with a lot of this. And a lot of times we get this part right. We're building momentum up to a product launch, up to an event. And where I have seen 95%, it's probably 99% of companies fail is the follow-up. Right? You can have all of this, you can get the media attention, you can get people there, but if you do nothing with it, it doesn't matter. So I would say the one thing I could say, if you would really have a takeaway from this, is don't forget the aftermath. Don't forget the communication you need to take afterwards, the continued research that you're doing, the messaging that you built here for your product launch. Continue that messaging or people will forget. I mean, there's, again, more statistics on people remember things for, a grand, 3 days, and then they start to forget. So the minute we let that drop off, people are already forgetting the messaging that you've put out there. So make sure that it's continuous. Okay, I think we can move on. I think now we're on to the next one, which is, I think we're on crisis. Go for it,
Of all things, I get to talk about crisis communications. And look, if it hasn't happened to you, it's a matter of time, sadly, right? And I would tell you that as the third bullet you'll see on the screen, that only 49% of respondents to a Deloitte survey said their companies have playbooks for likely crisis scenarios. I would argue that percentage is likely a little different. I would tell you that folks may sometimes say they have something like this and they actually don't. I think back to many years ago, this is probably 20 years, dating myself, being in this industry almost 30, a company was announcing a change in business. And the change in business was going to be the sad reality that half of its workforce was going to be laid off. They sent that press release to a news agency, and look, we're all not perfect. It wasn't us, for disclosure. For a set time for the article to go out, it's say 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever it was going to be. And HR teams had planned, and I know the executives in this company very well, the executives had planned to preemptively talk to everybody that afternoon. They all went to lunch to strategize on how their messaging was going to unfold. And that said news agency released the press release at noontime. So by the time the executives walked back into the office, the news had already broke, the markets knew it, and now they were staring down the barrel of some unhappy folks, as you would imagine, without a plan in place. So I guess the point is, right, when you think about crisis communication, folks always will prepare for what's going to be the worst, or perhaps what can be the end result, which sometimes can end up being the best. But you have to know who your constituents are in the event of crisis, right? Is there a reputation management firm, somebody you know and trust that you built a relationship for? In the community that we're all in, we know who these folks are. I encourage you to reach out to them, build relationships, because you never know one day when you may need them. The other part of it really is internal. Who are the internal spokespeople for the company? A lot of companies that we've talked to over the past years that have gone through their own crisis communications to whatever degrees they are, tend to have too many voices in the room that they end up gridlocked in what the decision is going to be and how they're going to approach the situation. So we encourage you to think about who that crisis team is in the event that you're going to need one. As an organization, globally or regionally, it doesn't matter, you should have one. Companies today have security teams in place to handle disaster recovery, God forbid, some sort of cybersecurity risk. There's a playbook for that. Large and small companies have that. And when you start to look at those companies and you talk about their crisis communications plan, most of them don't have that as well. And so we encourage all of our customers and people we talk to in the community to reach outside to the PR communities and build relationships to think about that. So I encourage you to think about having a crisis playbook. What does it look like? What benefits do you bring to those organizations in a moment of crisis? It is very important. I've been a part of one scenario in the past. We don't have time to discuss that one, but I tell you, the biggest thing for me was taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and analyzing the situation around. Sometimes you feel compelled to react immediately, and reality is you don't need to. You've got time. You want that message to count. You want to be very articulate, and you want to be very forthcoming and be very updative, right? I know I'm making a word up there as we go, but be sure that you're communicating constantly. It is very, very important about the facts, about the realities of what it is. We've examined a lot of crisis communication unfold in the media over the years, and have learned from those, from the industry that we're in, learn from them individually, because at some point, like I said, at some point it's going to happen to all of us, sadly. We'll move along, I think, to the next, so we can keep in queue with time. So I'm going to go a little quickly here. I apologize. Milestones and company performance. Right? You typically, I'm gonna focus on public companies if I can. We're geared, the world, right? MSNBC, CNBC, Bloomberg TV. They gear us towards quarterly results. The world in a public market scenario is all about that. It's about forward-looking guidance about awards and industries and association groups, or maybe I've been included in an indice, right? We know the obvious ones, the S&P, Dow, NASDAQ, maybe Russell. I'm going to tell you something about these four things. And from a PR perspective, constituent IR side, these four frameworks for milestones and performance should be well-baked. They should be ready to go with you inserting data in real time. Awards and industry association groups, we all know, typically there's a framework, a template that is used, right? It needs to be part of your PR repertoire for your organization. Forward-looking guidance, right? Company earnings guidance for future quarters, results, and inclusion in indices are great milestone things to talk about from a PR perspective that goes hand in hand with the IR side. Talking to analysts, talking to the shareholder base, talking to, if you're fortunate enough to have a sit down for 30 seconds or 2 minutes as a key feature on a morning financial news talk radio show or TV, very important to have these things from a milestone and performance perspective. Being included in an industry is a big thing. And companies more often than not that we've seen that are being announced as part of a Russell or S&P inclusion don't have any follow-up for it. They don't know what that really means as an organization. So I encourage you to reach out to folks, talk to the IR community from a PR side, and really understand the impacts and the benefits that can bring the business. We flip over again to the next slide if we could, and talk about M&A. Right, it's a communication strategy in my perspective. Right, there's constituents in M&A. The next slide we'll go through, but we won't go there yet. Right, is there's what's in it for the M&A side of an employee, what's in it from a vendor, what's in it from a shareholder, and what are all the things that we need to do as an organization when we get to that important perhaps transformational perspective of an acquisition or a merger, right? You have to have a plan in place. People more often than not work so hard on the due diligence, so hard on the transaction. The deal gets signed and announced, the press release goes out, and back to an earlier conversation and some things that Jennifer said, and although she didn't use these words, they drop the mic and they think at that point they've done everything. And really the reality is that's when the work begins, right? The messaging, if we go to the next slide, if we could, the messaging really is about what's in it for the employees, as Jennifer talked about earlier, about what's in it for me. What does the employee get out of this, right? Am I worried about my job? Do I take on more responsibility? Is there more opportunity for me? What does it mean for our customer? How do we teach our customer the impacts of this? Every employee, every executive, every PR and IR professional needs to have these things baked. And then eventually the investors get to hear about it, read about it, and talk about it, as well as your vendor partners. 95% of every single M&A transaction press release that we see in the markets does not have a follow-up press release for at least 30 days. Complete silence, right? Perhaps maybe constituent bases they're working on, but from an outreach perspective, if I'm a potential investor or customer or vendor, and I see nothing from you as an organization that just did a transformational transaction, right? I can't gauge where I fit, should I be interested? Biggest mistakes, in my opinion. And then really, what does success look like for you as the PR executive writing and helping the business really talk to these four constituents and perhaps other constituencies in your world? These are very, very important things that you all should be paying a lot of attention to. Sorry we talked so long. I know we've got a couple more slides if we move on here.
Yeah, we can blaze through these last two slides is all we have. Make sure when you're opening, again, this is very specific. But if you have new locations as part of the organization, get involved, make sure you're out there in the news, not just from a national standpoint, but from a regional standpoint. Get involved in the community, share how you're impacting the community. This goes back to, right, we're talking about events, host an event there, get the media, get news out about that, get people engaged, involved, show the new location, build that excitement around it, and really gain community support. And then we can go to the last slide because I know we've got about a minute to go. So that's really it, right? So these are 10 really important areas to share with the world. Ensure that you're contacting journalists, that you're getting your news out on a wire in addition to your, the rest of your communication strategy. Make sure your news is accurate, use social media, use the full plan, target the correct audience, and be innovative, captivating, and of course, always remember the radio station WIIFM. Thank you all again so much. We really appreciate you all attending this and being a part of this with us today.
That was fantastic. And Brian, the change comms, M&A, and such an important topic, and the crisis comms playbook, and creating that playbook and revisiting that playbook and adding to it and making sure that you're keeping up with it. And then of course, Karen, the nod to the awards and hiring and promotions, and Jennifer, Brian, Karen, can't thank you enough for all of your helpful hints today and the 10 PR stories. Appreciate your time. To the audience, as a reminder, you will receive a survey within 24 to 48 hours. And once you complete that survey, you will receive the recording, the bonus materials, and the slides from today's presentation. So I encourage you to take the survey. You will get those materials within 3 to 5 business days. And on behalf of Reagan Communications and Access Wire, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you at another event.